winked at him, and for a moment he thought he heard a soft quack, quack. But before he could examine this delightful object, Mrs. Brolly hurried him out into a garden which was full of sunflowers, and where rainbows arched across the sky. "What a beautiful garden! I didn't know you could have more than one rainbow," said Harry, and he and Mrs. Brolly hurried down the path. "Of course you can have more than one rainbow," said Mrs. Brolly. "You can have as many rainbows as you wish. People just think that there can only be one." Behind them, the fog was pouring from the kitchen door, hiding the garden from sight. It curled itself round their feet as they went, and then rose to Harry's knees. "Mrs. Brolly," said Harry, but again she seemed quite unconcerned. "Mr. Brolly thinks he makes the rainbows with his rain," she said, "but of course I make it with my sunshine." She opened her umbrella and rose some feet into the air above Harry's head. "Quick, quick, open your umbrella," she shouted. So Harry opened his umbrella and floated up to Mrs. Brolly's side. The fog swirled up around them, and Harry was a little alarmed. But Mrs. Brolly reached out and took his hand, and together they soared through the sky with some speed, clearing the bank of fog which rolled after them. "Mr. Brolly and his fog, I'll show him sunshine, the like of which he's never seen before," said Mrs. Brolly. "Umbrellas don't fly," said Harry. "Magic umbrellas fly," said Mrs. Brolly. "I didn't know there were any magic umbrellas," said Harry. "There are only 3 in the whole wide world," said Mrs. Brolly. "Yours and mine and Mr. Brolly's." "Only 3? How lucky he was," thought Harry, "to be the only child with a magic umbrella. With a magic umbrella, he could go anywhere." "Where are we going, Mrs. Brolly?" he said. "Anywhere and everywhere," said Mrs. Brolly, and for the moment her voice was soft and dreamy. "We're the Brollies," she said. "The Brollies make the weather, and there's weather all over the whole wide world." They came down beside a water hole. Mrs. Brolly sat down under a shady tree, took her patchwork quilt from her bag, and calmly began to stitch. Harry came down by the water hole, where a hippo lay, with a bird on its head. Close by, an elephant was drinking, and a brightly coloured snake lay basking on a rock. "Mrs. Brolly, where are we?" asked Harry. "In Africa," said Mrs. Brolly. Harry hung his umbrella on a branch of a tree and looked down at the sea. The sky was a brilliant blue, except for on the horizon where some wisps of cloud were drifting about. "Mrs. Brolly," said Harry, "I think it's going to rain." "Rain? Rain? Trust Brolly to try and spoil everything," said Mrs. Brolly. "I'll teach him a lesson." And she pointed her umbrella at the sky. The sun began to burn more fiercely than ever. And after a while, Harry saw that the plants round the waterhole had wilted, and that the waterhole itself was drying up. "No, don't do that, Mrs. Brolly," said Harry. "Let it rain a little." But Mrs. Brolly just went on stitching. Little by little, the waterhole shrank, until it was nothing more than a muddy puddle. And then that too began to disappear, and the earth began to crack. Puzzled, the animals stared at Harry. But what could he do to help? "Mrs. Brolly, I think you're being cruel," said Harry. "Cruel?" said Mrs. Brolly. "But it is the nature of the sun to be hot. Do you think that too much rain would be better? Please, Mr. Brolly, try to rain, shouted Harry. Try as hard as you can. And as he shouted, heavy clouds began to appear in the sky. Over the dry, burning desert they came, like great galleons. But as they came, the sun shone all the brighter. And in no time at all, they were shriveled away to nothing. "Aha!" cried Mrs. Brolly. Then in came the clouds again, heavier this time. Everything and everyone became still. Mrs. Brolly stopped stitching, and the animals stood close to Harry's side. Then came a flash of lightning, a clap of thunder, and the rain began to fall. Harder and harder it came, until the ground all around was sodden. "It's raining! It's raining! The rain's come back!" shouted Harry. Everyone was so happy that they grunted and stamped. They danced and hissed and flew around in little circles. "Mrs. Brolly, isn't this better?" said Harry. "Everyone's happy." "Is it?" said Mrs. Brolly. "Are they?" And up through the raindrops she went, clutching her bag. Below, the waterhole filled to overflowing. "Stop!" shouted Harry. "Stop the rain!" But it just rained harder than ever, until the water was up to his waist. The elephant lifted Harry up onto his back, where the snake lay with the bird nestled in his corners. With the hippo by his side, he clambered up onto a small island, and there they stood, with the water rising higher and higher, until suddenly, in the distance, Harry saw a small, ark-like boat. "Mr. Brolly! Mr. Brolly!" he called. "Please help us!" Soon the boat came bobbing by, and Harry and the animals climbed aboard. "Isn't this wonderful?" cried Mr. Brolly. "No!" shouted Harry and the animals. "Isn't it exhilarating?" cried Mr. Brolly. "No!" said Harry. "I want to go home." "But my boy," said Mr. Brolly, "you must enjoy it while you can. Why, I haven't had such a good storm for years." And he stood waving his arms like someone conducting an orchestra. And the boat whirled round as though it were in a whirlpool. Round and round and round it went. Harry awoke with a start. It was morning, and the sun was shining through the window. Mrs. Brolly stood at the door of the weather house, a little lifeless figure made of wood. The animals were toys once more, but Harry knew that they were only waiting for the magic to come again. And it would come again, of that he was certain. For next to his bed leant the new umbrella, with the duck's head handle. "Quack," it said softly to Harry, and it winked its eye.